Damien Omen II was released in 1978 and was the follow-up to Richard Donner's masterpiece, The Omen. The first Omen, no not that one, is a masterpiece of suspense and potential paranoia as a series of suspicious deaths and accidents befall the American ambassador Robert Thorn and his family, 5 years after he adopts a baby that, spoilers, turns out to be the Antichrist. Jesus! So join me, Steve Clark, as we talk about 10 good things about Damien Omen II. Number 1. The opening sequence. I love it when films follow on pretty much after the end of the first movie. Although most of Omen II takes place 7 years after Robert Thorn is shot dead by police while attempting to murder his son, the opening sequence of the movie takes place 1 week after that horrific incident. Leo McKern returns as mad-boffin archaeologist Carl Bugenhagen, who is the only actor to play the same role in more than one Omen movie, in this wonderful opening sequence in Israel. This is one of the only sequences left in the film that was shot by the original director Mike Hodges before being replaced by Don Taylor. Bugenhagen tries to convince his friend Michael to deliver a box to Damian's new guardian, who at this point could be the President of the USA, if we are directly following on from the events of The Omen. But this box contains the 7 daggers of Megiddo, as well as a letter explaining the situation. Bugenhagen explains to Michael that Damien Thorn is the Antichrist. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Michael is not too keen on this favour. To convince him, Bugenhagen asks Michael to go with him to a local ruin to look at Yagael's wall, which has several drawings on it that depict the Antichrist in several stages of his life. Michael reluctantly agrees, and the two of them head to the wall. Once the two of them arrive at the ruin, and Michael does indeed see Damian's young face on the wall, things start to go a bit pear-shaped, frankly. Thanks to a pesky satanic raven, more later, and the forces of evil that protect Damian, the ruin begins to crumble in on itself, which results in Bugenhagen and Michael being buried alive. There's a real sense of claustrophobia as the sand begins to rise around the two men and they realise that they are doomed. The scene is wonderfully shot, starting with Bugenhagen tanking around Israel on his bike and ending with the darkness of the two men being entombed. It's a great start to the movie. Number 2. The Raven. In the first movie, among Damian's protectors were some Rottweiler dogs, but Omen II goes with an entirely different species, a bird. We first see the Raven outside the ruin in Israel, but it makes a couple more appearances, one of which is very iconic. As well as killing Aunt Sylvia by giving her a heart attack, the Raven is responsible for one of the gorier deaths in the movie, as it attacks and blinds journalist Joan Hart, who herself has seen Yagael's wall and knows that Damian is not good news for the world. The bird wrangler for Omen II was Ray Berwick. Berwick trained and handled the crows that were featured in several scenes. For the attack on Joan Hart, he utilised a combination of live birds and a crow puppet to create those memorable sequences. The Raven must have been popular with the filmmakers as it appeared on the film's poster on release. Number 3. William Holden. Getting William Holden to play Richard Thorn for Omen II was probably easier than the filmmakers may have anticipated. Holden was a huge star of the silver screen in the 1950s and beyond, and had been in movies such as Sunset Boulevard, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, and The Wild Bunch. Holden was offered the role of Robert Thorn in The Omen, but he turned it down, as he didn't want to be in a movie about the devil, so the role went to Gregory Peck. Once Holden saw how successful the first film was, he stepped up to play the brother of Peck's character, Richard Thorn. Holden gives a terrific performance in the film, as he juggles corporate shenanigans and the deaths of all those around him. Number 4. The Acolytes. Before a million angry fanboy voices cry out in terror and start hitting their keyboards, I'm not talking about the Star Wars TV series that was cancelled last year. One of my absolute favourite things about Omen II are the acolytes that are in place to help protect and guide Damian. We have Robert Foxworth playing Paul Booher, who rises through the ranks of Thorn Industries. Perhaps more excitingly, we have the awesome Lance Henriksen as Damian's commanding officer at the military academy, Daniel Neff. It's a well-known fact that Henriksen is a 27%er, which means that any film he's in improves by 27% in terms of quality, just because he's there. Don't at me, people, that is scientific fact. During the events of the film, we have Booher silently pulling strings within Thorn Industries while Neff keeps a watchful eye on Damian at school. There are a couple of scenes in the film where Damian's acolytes guide him, either subtly or not, towards his destiny. During cousin Mark's birthday party, Paul takes Damian to one side and tells him that soon he will be turning 13 and heading towards manhood and initiations. He tells Damian that he will be initiated soon and it will be time to put away childish things and face up to who he is. It's a great moment. Surely you must be feeling it. Suspicions of destiny. A deep, wordless knowledge that our time has come. There's a scene later where all cryptic talk is dispensed with as Neff pretty much gives Damian the Antichrist for Dummies pep talk and gives him a large shove towards finding out who he is. Some would say it would be a revelation. I do wish that the role of Neff would have been bigger once this scene with Damian plays out. We don't really hear from him again, which is, quite unfortunate. We see him in the background a few times, but he has no major role to play. It would have been nice to see him in a few more scenes, especially after Damian discovers the truth of who he is. Apparently Lance Henriksen was unhappy that his role was reduced when the original director Mike Hodges was replaced by Don Taylor. Anyway, I do love the idea of Damian having Satanists and acolytes helping him out. I would have loved to have seen Robert Foxworth's character return in the final conflict, but I guess that due to the time gap between the two movies, in story terms at least, it wasn't possible. According to canon, Boo-Her was working with Damien Thorn in Thorn Industries for the next 20 years, helping cause chaos around the globe. The character of Boo-Her was further explored in Omen novels and allegedly converted to Christianity. Talk about an about turn. Number 5. Corporate espionage via Satan. I first saw Omen II when I was far younger, and there was one part of the plot that I never really understood, and that was all the corporate malfeasance that goes on within Thorn Industries. What can I say, I was a slow child. As I've already talked about, Paul Boo-Her is a secret Satanist who rises through the ranks of Thorn Industries. When we first see him in the film, Paul is butting heads with Bill Atherton, played by Lou Ayres, as he wants the company to expand beyond electronics and move into agriculture. To do this, Boo-Her proposes that Thorn Industries buys up land in Africa and India to focus on famine relief. Atherton believes it's unethical and immoral and wants no part of it. Richard Thorne sides with Bill, but assures Paul that his plans may be used in future. After the death of Bill Atherton, which I will talk about soon, Paul steps into Atherton's role and puts his plan into effect. So what's the end game here? I would assume that with Thorn Industries owning a lot of land in these countries, they would be able to control food supplies in those areas and ultimately control the people. Thorn Industries could instigate famine and manipulate the populations. Ultimately, Thorn Industries could destabilise or coerce governments if they become dependent on the food that is supplied through Thorn Industries. This ties into a passage in the Book of Revelation. No one may buy or sell except one who has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. When Dr. Passerian reports to Paul that some landowners in India are being murdered for refusing to sell their land to Thorn Industries, he suffers a grisly accident and is poisoned by toxic gases when a rogue unit malfunctions at a Thorn manufacturing plant. I love this subplot as it shows that the chess pieces are already in play for when Damian will become the head of Thorn. By controlling global economics, Damian will expand his influence into political arenas too. I didn't get this at all when I was younger. When Passerian dies, I had no idea why. Now I know. Like I said, I was a slow child. Number 6. Brilliant death scenes. The Omen has some iconic death scenes. Father Brennan being impaled by a church spire and Keith Jennings being decapitated by a sheet of glass, but I get the feeling that the filmmakers for Omen II were determined to up the ante for the sequel, as we get some incredible death scenes. My favourite death scene is Bill Atherton's. As previously mentioned, Atherton is standing in the way of Paul Boo-Her and his agriculture project, so it comes as no surprise that when during an ice hockey game on a frozen lake at Richard's house, the ice gives way and Atherton falls underneath. Hello Raven! Damian goes to help, but he is stopped by Boo-Her. There are a couple of things I love about the sequence. Firstly, the score, and I'll talk more about that later, but I also love how the sequence is filmed. As viewers, we get to go under the ice with Atherton as the current takes him away. We see him pounding on the ice in absolute panic, and you can see his friends frantically following his path atop the ice. The scene chills my blood every time I see it, and another thing I love is the end of the sequence when everybody freezes. And I don't mean they're freezing bloody cold, but all the actors freeze in their tracks as the camera pulls away in a tableau. Richard Thorne is on his knees by the hole in the ice that Atherton briefly surfaced from, while everyone else is frozen in place as the score sort of carried on. I love that so much. Another couple of deaths worth mentioning are Dr. Kane and Joan Hart. I briefly mentioned Joan Hart earlier when talking about the Raven, but her death scene is incredibly effective, but it does unfortunately end on a bit of a comic note. Joan wants to interview Richard Thorn, and when, after having ambushed him and asking about Damian, she's politely told to do one. After seeing Damian and having her fears confirmed that he is indeed a bit of a wrong'un, she is driving down a deserted highway when her car conks out. When she gets out of her car, "Hello, Mr. Raven," he's on the car roof, and he proceeds to swoop and attack her. Now, I live in Australia, so I'm used to magpies swooping me on occasion, but this is slightly more terrifying. The Raven attacks Joan and pecks her eyes out, leaving her blooded and blinded on the side of the road. The work done in this scene is great, with a mixture of puppetry, bird wrangling and quick edits, giving the viewer a real feeling of fright as the frenzied attack continues. Joan blindly stumbles into the road and towards the path of a huge truck, which promptly runs her over. I did say the scene ends on a bit of a comic note, as the shot of Joan's body flying through the air is clearly a mannequin. Speaking of mannequin, this leads us to the death of Dr. Kane. Dr. Kane is played by Mashash Taylor, who played the character of Hollywood in the movie Mannequin. What a segue! After Passerian's death from toxic gases, Damin and his class were also briefly exposed to those gases. All the kids are checked out of the hospital, and Dr. Kane noticed some abnormality in Damian's blood test results. Because Damian was unaffected by the exposure, Kane does some digging and works out that Damian has jackal DNA in his blood. Oops. He gets a lift, or elevator for any American viewers, to go downstairs to discuss this with a colleague. Let's just say he never makes it. In perhaps the goriest death in Omen II, Dr. Kane ends up being cut in half by the elevator cable. It's delightfully gory as the poor man's guts and intestines spill out all over the floor of the lift. Omen II does definitely up the ante with some of the death scenes. Number 7. Damian's history lesson. Who hasn't been caught sniggering in class or passing a note around? Well, even the Antichrist has. In another scene which demonstrates that Damian has some kind of powers, after being caught out acting naughty in history class, the teacher tries to make an example of him. He's brought out in front of the class with the piece of paper that he's caught with, and the teacher says, "So, we have an artist in the class. What's wrong, Thorn? Am I boring you?" He starts to ask Damian all about Napoleon's campaign, and when Damian does indeed demonstrate his knowledge about the topic, the teacher can't let it go, and ends up giving Damian a history quiz, and demands to know dates from famous deaths throughout history. Up to this point, you could just assume that Damin does have decent knowledge of history, but it becomes apparent as the test continues and the teacher becomes more flustered that something strange is going on. I particularly like how cocky Damian becomes, especially with the 30 Years' War question when he asks start or finish, and the teacher almost barks the word start as he's getting more riled up. As Damian answers every single question correctly for over a minute, the teacher's almost on the brink of tears. The scene is interrupted by Sergeant Neff as the teacher strops out of the room. When Neff questions Damian about it, Damian isn't sure how he knew all the answers. He just did. It just goes to show that when you're the son of the devil, you don't need to do homework or revise. Satan will help you cheat on your exams. Number 8. Damian's destiny. It takes a while for Damian to embrace who he truly is. After the not-so-subtle nudge from Sergeant Neff, Damian does some research and reads the Book of Revelation. With the aid of a handy mirror, he looks at his scalp and finds the number of the beast, 666, and that confirms it for him. I like that Damian's first reaction is abject terror. He flees in fear and runs for dear life to the lake before yelling, "Why? Why me?" into the sky. I mean, technically you should yell that towards the ground, toward hell, but hey-ho. It's a lot to take in for a teenager. They are moody gits at the best of time, with hormones flying all over the place, bad haircuts, let's face it, Damian's haircut is one of the scariest things in the film, and teenage growing pains. However, these growing pains are pretty significant. I like seeing how Damian goes from absolute denial to the full embrace of who he really is, and I think the shatter point for this is when he murders his cousin Mark. It's established earlier in the film that Damian and Mark are very close as brothers. But when Mark overhears Richard and Charles Warren discussing Bugenhagen's Box of Delights and how Damian could be the son of Satan, this understandably freaks him out. The scene where Mark confronts Damian in the snowy woods is excellent. Damian pleads with Mark, tells him that he loves him, but he must choose to come with him. It's here where we see Damian fully embrace his destiny. When he eventually admits the truth to Mark, he says that he represents the greatest power in the world, the Desolate One. desolate because his greatness was taken from him and he was cast down, but he is risen in me. In the original script, there is a line of dialogue where Damian says that Satan is looking through my eyes and wearing my body. But that was cut, thankfully. Wearing my body? Is Satan Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs? Damian again asks Mark to come with him, but he refuses. Even though he loves Mark, he will do what he has to be done to protect himself. He commands Mark to look at him, and he causes his cousin to die from a brain aneurysm. I think Damian's reaction to the death is really well done. He screams in distress at what he's done, but this shows that he will kill anyone to protect himself. I think it's a very powerful scene. Number 9. Jerry Goldsmith. Yes, I'm going to harp on about the score. Getting Jerry Goldsmith back to do the score was one of the best decisions the producers made. Goldsmith had won an Oscar for his score for The Omen, and deservedly so. It is excellent. But his score for Omen II is excellent, and it reminds me of John Williams' score for Jaws 2. If you haven't seen my previous video on Jaws 2, go give it a watch. I mentioned the Jaws 2 score because what Goldsmith does here is very similar. He doesn't fall back on the Ave Satani piece of the score until the very end. He composes a wonderful score here, using the choral voices to fantastic effect. I love the music as Bugenhagen and Michael arrive at the ruins in Israel, and the music that accompanies Bill Atherton's death under the ice is exceptional. Goldsmith's score plays a very important role in setting the tone. Some of the scenes may have seemed a bit comical without the score. The scene outside of Neff's office where Teddy, the bully, is attacked by an invisible force could have seemed silly without the score. One thing that makes me smile is Goldsmith's insistence in putting random words into the score. Sandwich, platypus, Greenwich, bagpuss. Number 10. The Whore of Babylon surprise. One of the final surprises of the movie happens during the climax in the Chicago Museum. Richard and his wife Anne are waiting for Damien to arrive, and Richard plans to murder Damien with the 7 daggers of Megiddo. Anne refuses to believe Richard and is trying her best to persuade him not to go through with killing Damien. Damien arrives and listens outside as Richard and Anne argue, and then we get a surprise. Spoilers! Anne takes the daggers and stabs Richard, killing him. As he looks at her in shock, she says, "I've always belonged to him." Yes! It turns out that Anne was always in on it, and, if internet chatter is to be believed, she is in fact the Whore of Babylon. The whore is mentioned earlier in the film when Charles is giving a slideshow to Richard and family of the artifacts from the Israel dig. He shows them a slide of a wall carving of the Whore of Babylon. Anne shudders at the image, saying it's not very nice. I do like that interesting twist at the end. Damien is using his new supernatural powers and he causes an explosion at the museum, engulfing Anne in flames, and she dies a fiery death. According to the script that I read, Anne is in ecstasy as she dies, screaming Damien's name over and over, and the screenplay describes her like a demonic Joan of Arc, joyous in her burning death. Those are my 10 good things about Damien Omen II. What do you think about my choices? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel to ensure that you do see any future 10 good things videos. I'll be back again soon with another 10 good things, but in the meantime, good night.